So this one kind of highly unfortunate, and the amount that we're going to be talking about it is going to be somewhat limited. But essentially, it's pretty much common knowledge now that a couple of weeks back, Insomniac was hacked and a ransomware demand was made, something like $2 million worth of Bitcoin in exchange for the information not being released. Sony and Insomniac didn't pay the ransom and the information was released, something like 1.6, 1.7 terabytes of data. Probably the most damaging leak I think I can ever remember. It's actually caused a lot of soul searching, I think, from the games media in particular, and wondering how to address this, how to actually cover what is like possibly certainly one of the biggest stories of the year. It's a tricky one. Now, typically, we don't really cover this sort of stuff because, well, fundamentally, you want, as a journalist, first-hand knowledge of the material in order to accurately report on it, in which case, certainly in this case, and in several others, actually, that we haven't touched, you're basically talking about handling stolen goods, which isn't really a good thing to be doing. That said, pretty much the entirety of the information has now sort of disseminated into the public. There's big Reddit threads, etc., etc. I'm going to go to you first of all on this one, John. It's devastating for Insomniac. Pretty much everything that you could possibly want to know about their business is now out in the public domain. I think the thing which is causing a lot of people to think twice about even touching this is the fact that it's not just corporate information that is included in all of this files. It's personal stuff from Insomniac staff. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, this is pretty much, on that note, it's very similar to the 2020 Capcom leak where the same kind of information was leaked out about employees as well. And that stuff's always really nasty. Or the ESA leak, which was good fun. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
But that side of things is obviously very nasty, and that's unfortunate, especially when it's like a first party kind of studio, because I feel like, you know, that really winds people up. So who knows what'll happen there. But yeah, it's just, these hacks have become more and more common, obviously. Unfortunately, we've definitely seen some big ones. And I think when you say this one's the worst one yet, I guess that would probably come to the fact that beyond all the personal stuff released, there's also builds of things out there that shouldn't be out there. There's just stuff. There's things that you usually don't see from it. Although on that front, I guess the closest I can think of is something like the Half-Life 2 leak, but that was just the game files, right?
Yes, that's right.
Not anything beyond that, but still. So this kind of has the worst of, it's like combining Capcom and then the Half-Life 2 leak from Valve all those years ago into one big thing, which is
and the Microsoft FTC thing,
and the Microsoft FTC thing, all in one, which is like, good Lord.
Yeah, it's really not good, and I really feel bad for Insomniac. I think there are certain questions that need to be asked about whether games media should be covering it, and I think it's basically going to be down to the individual and you know, their own curation of the information and what they decide to write about, because I don't think you can ignore the fact that it happened. No. Right? Because as a news editor, for example, you wouldn't be doing your job then. No, Oliver, I'm just curious what you make of this and what the ramifications are in terms of media coverage, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that GTA 6 leak, I believe last year was a big leak, but this really dwarfs it. In addition to all the things that were mentioned, you also have like a pretty decent video of a vertical slice. You have financials. You have project plans out to 10 years. All kinds of canceled games. It's basically like Insomniac is like an open book at this point, it feels weird and a little uncomfortable to be in that position as someone who covers this kind of stuff. You know, there's not much surprise in what they do.
Yeah.
In terms of covering it or not covering it, I think it's just a matter of what people are personally comfortable with. I mean, I don't have an opposition to people who are covering it, but I also think that it's just the nature of this kind of hack in particular. It's not like someone just intercepted some Stray SQL or something. It's quite an intense hack with a ransom attached. So
Absolutely.
yeah, I mean, I think there are some interesting details in here, but ultimately this is not the way that I would have preferred to have learned them.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to go to some supporter questions now because I think there's some quite salient points coming up here. We'll take this one from Robert Brown, first of all. How do you decide what information is and isn't ethical to draw from a leak? I heard you reference Jensen's prophecies a number of times. Is that similar to the Insomniac leak, or are there important differences? So on the DF Direct docket here, I actually tracked down the original Jensen's prophecy leak. And it was literally a guy who wasn't particularly happy about all of these games on GeForce Now actually being removed from the service. And he figured out a way to actually look into the communications between his PC and the server, and actually discovered that there were like 1,800 entries, and he just shared them. There wasn't really malicious intent there, I don't think. So I don't really see this as being anywhere near the same sort of level of sort of nastiness that's going on here. Nobody's going to gain from this by sharing that information, or nobody was blackmailing NVIDIA. Let's take this question from Eric Hurst. I've seen many people expressing their vitriol towards journalists and reporters giving attention to the leaks from Insomniac, with certain notable folk asking people to stop reporting on the leaks and leave Insomniac alone. With several major leaks in recent times, GTA 6, Xbox, Capcom, Jensen's Prophecy and more, which by the way have been covered many times by many different outlets, where should the line be drawn in terms of what is reported on and what isn't? I believe it is at best mildly disturbing that people resort to attacking journalists in situations like this. Leaks happen and they can be tragic, and I believe efforts and attention should be directed towards leak prevention and protections for these companies, but that burden is for the parent corporations to bear. It's their responsibility to protect their employees and their work. The last people who should be to blame are the ones who strive to make sure that the facts about games in this industry are reported on, and that the information is as accessible as possible to people. Thank you and happy holidays. That one from Eric Hurst. I think, basically, if you are a news editor out there and you're happy with the quality of the information, and you have got a specific way that you feel sensitively handles the information, then you're just doing your job fundamentally. That's my sort of take on it. This one from CTG867. John seemed to indicate on Twitter that DF won't be covering the information from the Insomniac hack. I found this strange, as last week the team fielded a supporter question in the GTA 6 Direct regarding the Rockstar hack and spoke openly about it relative to the revealed trailer. Is it not inevitable that some aspect of the Insomniac hack will come up in a similar fashion in a future Direct? I guess I just wanted to know the distinction that the team will be making here. Thanks for the great work you do as always. Well, this is a really interesting question because we didn't report on the GTA 6 leak at the time, and but you can't deny that it exists, that it happened, and also this was a really interesting and almost like a teachable moment in that the videos that were released at the time basically bear no resemblance to the revealed trailer that we saw. So, this is actually pointing out, that the leaks were, it was premature to actually see that stuff. But what I will say, John, and I think this is quite interesting, you were talking about the Half-Life 2 game leak from decades ago. I do think maybe there is some sort of statute of limitations on leaks, where actually this stuff becomes almost an artifact of the time. The kind of bitterness and the nastiness has kind of like mellowed out over the years. Do you see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
It's become basically a fact of life at that point, and again, you can't really deny it.
Exactly.
So I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, the statute of limitations. I don't know how that all shakes out legally, but I think that's interesting from like almost a preservation standpoint, because it gives you a look at like software in development. And I would say, the Half-Life leak, for instance, I would say that did not impact the reception or sales on the public side. It was a headache for Valve at the time, just like this will be a headache for Insomniac, obviously. But in the end, the game was very well received. It's considered a classic. It went on, and that information that came out in the Half-Life leak is actually just interesting teachings. It shows a lot about what went into it. It shows how it changed within that year between when it was leaked and when it was released. And it gives a lot of insight into that sort of thing. Something else, you know, we've seen a lot of games like very early in development, and I think the public often doesn't get that look at it. And I can understand why companies would want to protect that. Well, for multiple reasons, but one of those reasons is the fact that folks that don't understand what it takes to create these will look at what is released and make assumptions without understanding the pre-release nature of it, right? Like a game can be playable from start to finish, even when like most of it is still gray box, where it's just like gray textures with like the little, you know, pattern running through it. And that could be considered playable from start to finish, but it doesn't look anything like what will actually ship, right? That stuff is interesting. It's teachable. But it can also be used in negative ways. But I still think in the end, it won't necessarily impact the success of this. I don't think there's going to be anyone that says, oh yeah, because of that leak, we're not going to play or buy Wolverine, for instance. Right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I don't think that aspect of things is necessarily that harmful long term. And I do think in the future this stuff can be discussed, but, you know, obviously it's very much in that legal gray zone, and we obviously should not go down that path. And we are staying consistent with what we've done in the past. And I think, as an aside, you were talking about the NVIDIA stuff. I think there is some confusion there because there's Jensen's prophecy, but there was also like an extra, like an additional hack on NVIDIA that happened a while ago, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. That is a separate thing, and I don't believe that has anything to do with the Jensen's prophecy list.
No. I believe that was some sort of hack on NVIDIA's servers,
right? And that was more like this, basically, not as damaging, but it was more like this.
Yeah, I agree with that. And we've kind of mentioned that one in passing as well in the past, specifically because there was a lot of Switch 2 conjecture that came out of it. But ultimately, that's kind of also in a bit of a grey area. I think with this one, it's just the fact that it's just the scale of it is almost incomprehensible.
Yeah, it really is.
It's not like a little bit, you know, a couple of tidbits here and there about, you know, the NVN API from NVIDIA. It's basically everything, you know, everything that you could even conceive of knowing about Insomniac is now out there. And it's kind of staggering almost.
And it's still weird for like, at least for me, even to look at these types of situations. We're not really news reporters, right? And I think out of everyone working for DF, are any of us actually like really trained in terms of like journalism? I mean, I studied programming.
I worked at news companies before this, but
okay, so you actually do have some links to it.
Yeah,
I sure did not. I just did tech stuff, and so, you know, learning how to handle this stuff was always kind of a tricky business for me because I had no real insight into it. I just relied on Rich basically sort of guiding us through.
Yes,
because you've been around doing this for a long time. But I'm not even. Did you actually have any like real training for this, or is this the stuff you've learned? Okay, so you've actually studied this stuff in the past.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. You know, there's certain things that you just do not do, and handling stolen goods is one of them. But, you know, you do reach the point now where, you know, a lot of this stuff is out in the public domain, has been distilled down from the original sources, is now public knowledge. And I think news editors have a very sort of big challenge ahead of them in how to cover this. And there's been various takes and responses to it. And that's going to be tricky, and it will differ on a per outlet basis.
Yeah.
I do think, though, that there has to be some discussion on things that are of public interest, right? And without going into specifics, John, I think we've been talking about this for a long time, but the concepts that the AAA gaming space is potentially unsustainable in the long term kind of comes into focus with some of the information that came out there. Maybe that's not a discussion we should be having now.
Not necessarily.
Because it is raw, but I do think that there are certain elements of this leak that do have a public interest to it that will be starting debates. And and it brings certain things which we've been worried about into focus. That's kind of all I've really got to say about this one at the time. At this time, it's really unfortunate. It's also unfortunate to see social media at its worst, with information being weaponized.
Yeah, I think it's just everybody has different like goals for what they want to do with this stuff, or people to get angry at. And I think some of the complaints people have had against those covering it, some of it's valid, because there are some presenters sites where it feels like they openly covered like the Capcom leak without any sort of issue, but then this suddenly, this is a line too far, we're not going to touch this one, even though they're kind of the same thing. So I think there's that consistency problem there that some very select sites engaged in, not us, thankfully, which is great. But I think that's where a lot of that stuff came from, the vitriol there. But then also, obviously, it's a passionate moment. A lot of other developers were sticking up for Insomniac, of course, as you'd expect. And I think then you have, of course, the console warriors, the usual suspects really going at it. On top of everything else.
We did cover the Microsoft leak, where they essentially leaked their own documents to the FTC. And
that was a little different though, right? Because that was not like a stolen hack kind of situation.
Yeah. There wasn't a sort of element of nastiness to it. This was information that, just came out by accident, and the redacted versions of the documents would have come anyway. So it was just, that was the difference there. I do think it is a different scenario there.
It's like somebody leaving a USB stick like in a public place, and you're just like, oh, what's this?
Yeah.
Or maybe like when the iPhone 4 leaked, if you remember that, where like somebody just like left it at a bar and everybody's like taking photos, like, what is this thing?
I think there are a lot of analogies between the Xbox leak and this leak in terms of the scope. I mean, the Xbox leak was a lot smaller than this leak. I mean, maybe broader in terms of the significance of what it was revealing, but that was also indicating future plans. It also had all kinds of financials in it for games, for Game Pass acquisitions, for all kinds of things, right? The difference is, that was basically a snafu from a Microsoft lawyer, it seems like, or a lawyer contracted by Microsoft. And this was a very different category of leak. And then also, like, everything was very abstracted in that document. Like, it's all big picture numbers of how is the Xbox business doing? How are these games doing? Whereas this is like, there's some stuff in here about like potential future layoffs, headcounts, things like this. That's just like very, very raw material. That's quite different from that. So, but I mean, the Xbox leak, it was a Microsoft mistake, and it was fascinating to us in particular because it was hardware that it was significantly into development, whereas this is just like game footage that is not representative in the slightest of the final product.
I don't really have too much more to say about this, but obviously, we're thinking about the Insomniac guys at the moment. I just can't really get my head around the scale of this. I mean, it is the entire business laid out bare. And I think also there's the danger that there's so much information here and so little context that you don't really understand what's coming your way in a lot of this stuff. It can be misinterpreted as well.